So last night was full of a lot, and I do mean a lot, of drone strikes across Russia. There were drone strikes in Pskov. There were drone strikes reportedly in Moscow. There were drone strikes everywhere. It was the largest Ukrainian drone strikes across all of Russia for the entirety of the war, and it really shook them to their core. In fact, that night while we were streaming yesterday, the Russians were responding with missile attacks and drone attacks across Ukraine, and a few of those missiles, I thought they were drones, but it turned out afterwards I found out it was missiles, blew up very close to the building I'm in right now, which caused it to shake. So it was a very hot night last night, and it seems like even though it's probably not going to be as hot as it was last night, it is still pretty, I guess you could say, warm tonight, with more drone strikes being reported, and I'm still waiting. I have yet to get any reports of any missiles or drones being launched towards Kiev, because I am in the outskirts of Kiev, about 30 or 40 minutes outside of Kiev, so a lot of the stuff gets intercepted above where I am. But I have yet to get any reports of any drone strikes or any missiles, any suicide drones or any missiles being launched towards Kiev. That might change. No matter what, though, it's probably not going to be as large as last night, because it was the largest drone and missile attack from the Russians in a very, very long time. But very few got through. Very, very few missiles, very few drones got through. Only a few did. And 2 people did die. You know, some people living in civilian housings in Ukraine did die. But overall, compared to the size of the drone strikes and the missile strikes that they directed towards Ukraine, very few got through. Whereas and very little was done actually that was strategically significant. The only thing that we know of that was destroyed of any significance were, I guess, 2 civilians, which that's not of strategic significance. That's a campaign of terror. Whereas the drone strikes on the Russian side ended up hitting a very major airbase in Pskov, which is near Estonia, on the Russian side of the border. There's an airbase there, which ended up disabling 4 Russian aircraft, 4 transport aircraft, very important, very expensive aircraft, including 2 of those, which just completely burst into flames. That wasn't the only damage did. That was just a microcosm of it. I know there's some pictures floating around online, but just to give you an idea of the type of damage that was done last night. And now we've got more strikes tonight. Here are explosions that are being reported right now in Russian-occupied Crimea. Wait for it. You can see it in the distance in a moment. There it is. Now, if you look, you can see that some of the explosions are very bright red and some of them are blue, which does lead me to believe, even though we don't have any confirmation, that this might be strikes on electricity or electrical infrastructure, which, I mean, I'm just guessing here. I'm just spitballing. I'm just speculating, but that usually is a sign that it might be, electrical infrastructure, but we don't know that for sure. I'm just speculating here.
Сейчас так над Феодосией мощно пролетело 3 ракеты. Как я думала, просто самолет летит или вертолет. Оно раз пролетело, 2 пролетело, потом 3. Я вышла на балкон. И, короче, сейчас как бахнула ракета. Взорвали ее. Засветило. Просто геть. Сейчас засветило там.
Okay, well, I thought there was an explosion here. I got this mixed up with another video, but you can kind of see smoke in the distance. We don't really need to listen to what she's saying, but you can see smoke in the distance. Yeah, so Crimea is pretty hot. That's not all that's hot right now. There are other locations that we're hearing reports back from as well. In fact, Pskov, which was struck yesterday. Here's a picture from yesterday's strikes. Pskov, which again is in this area. Let me see if I can show you. This area of the country up here in this oblast, in this region, it is getting struck again right now. There is air alerts in the area. We're hearing reports of explosions. So more Ukrainian drone attacks across the country. Now, this obviously, and here's a video actually from last night of the, and this video we're going to bring up in a second, because it's very interesting, the reaction that this video got from Russian state TV. Here's a video from last night showing local Russian air defense trying to shoot down the Ukrainian drones. Now, this video isn't that interesting. It sounds like small arms fire mostly that is being shot at the drones. There's nothing here that's particularly interesting. This is to be expected. But that didn't get a positive reaction from Russian state TV, specifically Solenev, that the governor of the oblast that was being struck posted that video. He was angry that the local governor was posting these videos because he accused them of behaving like military bloggers. Now, if you don't know, the Russian government seems to be in a feud right now with military bloggers, specifically pro-war military bloggers, not people who are saying, oh, the war is bad, the war is evil, but people who are like, oh, the war is in a terrible state right now. It's not being led well. I am pro-war, but I just believe we're not killing the Ukrainians efficiently, and we need to be more efficient, or possibly we might not be able to kill enough Ukrainians and we'll lose, right? That's a lot of the pro-war blogger position. But within that position lies a lot of critiques of the Russian military establishment, particularly Russian Defense Minister Shoigu and Gerasimov. This is where a lot of the Wagner feud between Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Russian Ministry of Defense laid at their performance during the war. And of course, Yevgeny's personal political ambitions as he was trying to box out Gerasimov and Shoigu. Point is, though, that there's been a lot of complaints about how the war has been fought, how the war has been mismanaged, and how the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense has led the Russian military into ruin time and time and time again, whether it be at Volodar, whether it be in Kiev, whether it be in Kharkiv, whether it be in Kherson. And a lot of the rank and file of the military hold a lot of anger towards the leadership of the military. Maybe not even just for direct military losses like that, but for logistical problems and logistical mismanagement. So many vehicles at the start of the war had to be abandoned without fuel, which the Ukrainians had captured. In fact, at one point in the war, I don't know if this is true or not, the Ukrainians captured more tanks from the Russians than they got from any other country that has provided them with aid and armor and assistance. Meaning that the main deliverer of tanks to the Ukrainian armed forces is the Russian armed forces. And that type of logistical failure obviously is going to create resentment amongst the rank and file who had to, drive those tanks, ran out of fuel, and then were given no instructions about what to do. That's just one example of a failure. We could talk about the suicide march on Volodar, or what's happening right now with the 205th and their command, sending their soldiers forward into the swamp areas between Kherson and the right bank of the river, and they're getting shelled without artillery support. There's so many different complaints. But the military is cracking down on those complaints. The Ministry of Defense is cracking down on those complaints after the Wagner coup and after Wagner went kaput. They want to make sure that there's no more room for a dissenting kind of rising figure to raise out of the ranks and challenge Putin again.
Flemmy has donated $5. I recently heard that aside from the 5 early losses there were no more Leopard losses. Is that true?
Thank you so much for the $5. I appreciate that. I recently heard that aside from 5 early losses, there are no more Leopard losses. Is that true? I think so. I think there was 5 Leopards out of 71 is what a Forbes report recently said. I don't know if that's just counting like Leopard 2As, 2A4s, and 2A6s, or if that's also counting Leopard 1s. That would be very surprising if that report from Forbes was only counting Leopard 1s. But that's the report from Forbes recently. I would recommend you read that. Anyway, the government is now cracking down on these bloggers because they don't want that dissent to spread, to have a very negative impact on morale, and allow someone like Yevgeny Prigozhin to rise through the ranks again. Now, some, though, like me, are interested in if this is going to cut off one of the few pressure valves that exists in the lower ranks of the Russian military, where they would, record videos, look into the camera, say, hey, we're out of ammo. Hey, we're out of this. Please bring us this. Please bring us that. And they could critique somewhat openly, not very openly, online their commanders and the mismanagement. If that pressure valve doesn't exist, you know, if there's no squeaky wheel, how do you fix the wheel? And what is this? Is this going to cause even more discontent amongst the rank and file? Just some things I'm wondering about. But with all of that in mind, see how this propagandist reacts not only to the drone attacks, because he is so angry about the drone attacks on Russia, but also notice how he reacts specifically to the governor of these local oblasts posting videos of them having to shoot down these drones. Good morning, dears. Although
morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Thank you so much, RC489, for the tier 1. I appreciate it. Although, listen, what's so good about it? Please tell me. I'm trying to understand. What's so good about this morning? Realistically speaking, I want to once again address our governors, among others. Stop pretending to be bloggers. What are you doing? Why are you posting photos of what landed where and what is on fire? You know, I grew up in the American political scene, right? Specifically the Maryland political scene, locally in College Park, Prince George's County. That's where I grew up. Now, I don't know where politics is done where he is from. You know, I've read stuff online. I've talked to Russia analysts. I have some idea, but I've never been to Russia. This man's been in Russia his whole life. Now, where I'm from, the way that local politicians and, you know, activists in the community inform people about problems in their community and try to keep them safe is by keeping them well informed and by being relatively transparent, within reason, of course. You know, you're not going to expect every single politician to post like their social security number, but, you know, within reason, to be transparent and to talk about what's happening in the community. Now, if in my town there were bombs falling from the sky, I would expect my local politicians to inform me about the bombs falling from the sky and what the local government and the federal government and the state government and even the county government, what all of these governmental institutions are going to do to protect me. So now the local governor of one of these regions that were bombed, you know, where drones are falling from the sky, is posting video to try to be, I don't know how transparent, but at least inform the public about what's going on and that there is some form of air defense in the area. And now Solenyov's angry about that. The focus and the anger should be on the fact that they're in the situation in the first place, that the conditions were created where now there are drone attacks all across Russia and the Russians basically can't do anything about it. It is not the local governor's fault for telling the truth about it or posting videos about it. And when I say telling the truth, I mean it about on the most basic level on this specific instance. I don't even mean generally about the war. I just mean he at least acknowledged that his community was being bombed. It's kind of hard to cover up explosions right over your house. It's very hard to ignore that as somebody who's had that experience before. What else has to happen so that things can become clear in your heads? By the way, I love his I love his jacket, by the way, the CCCP on his jacket. Fantastic. I wonder if Marx and Engels would have been like, you know what? Actually, I believe true communism is when you invade other countries and steal all their electrical appliances. It was a powerful attack. Why was it possible? Where did it originate? There are losses of our military transport aviation. He's talking about 4 IL-76s, transport military aircraft. At least 2 of them were just completely burnt to the ground. Very expensive aircraft. This is very bad. Why? First of all, this action was being prepared. Was there information about this? Was it sufficient in order to prevent it? No. There was a reconnaissance of the targets. Thanks to NATO's aerospace intelligence, among other things. I actually don't know that. I don't know if NATO is providing Ukraine with aerospace intelligence of Russian positions within Russia. I do have good reason to believe, and we've have multiple reports indicating that NATO is providing Ukraine intelligence, but I was always under the assumption that it was intelligence about targets in Crimea, targets in the Donbass, targets within occupied territory. I don't know if NATO is also providing intelligence about targets inside Russia, especially if many NATO states, basically all NATO states, except for maybe like, I don't know, Poland, are concerned about Ukraine using American or Western supplied munitions to strike these targets. Then again, it doesn't seem like any of these targets that were struck within Russia, outside of some of the missiles that are striking in Crimea, which is of course Ukrainian territory, not Russian territory, then all of the targets that were struck within Russia seem to be struck with domestically made Ukrainian drones. So that actually makes me re-wonder. That actually, let me take a stop. Let me stop right here for a moment. I remember one of the main complaints that keeps getting made about sending long-range missiles to the Ukrainians is, what if they use these long-range missiles to strike targets within Russia? Now, the Ukrainians have already made commitments about the Storm Shadow that they're not going to use it to strike targets within Russia. And they've had the Storm Shadow for a while. That definitely has the range to strike targets within Russia. And the Ukrainians haven't done it. In fact, not only have they not done it, they've used different tools made domestically made Ukrainian drones to do it instead. So they've already made the commitment to the Storm Shadow. They've had the Storm Shadow, and they haven't used it to strike targets within Russia. And they have a means to strike it through other means, with domestically made drones. It sounds like the argument against sending long-range missiles, the idea that it could be an escalatory weapon, definitely after the Storm Shadow was sent already, the argument is just getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Like, what's the fear? That they're going to start striking targets within Russia? They're already doing that. So it's not like it can escalate it. I mean, it would be different if they're using Western-made weapons, but if we've asked them for that commitment and they can do it through another means, why use the Western-made weapon? Harkater Nuck, thank you so much for the tier 1 and being sub for 6 months. I appreciate it. Wait, does that say sub for 6 months or subscribe to tier 1 for 6 months in advance? Dang, never mind. You didn't sub for 6 months. You sub for 1 month to 6 months in advance. Okay, got it. Okay. Big guy over here. We are still lackadaisical towards them. They are carrying out military tasks directed towards us. They should be destroyed. We scrambled our aircraft and chased them away. Aren't they directing the enemy's drones? I don't believe there's any evidence that we direct the Ukrainian operations. There has been some reports that they will ask us for better intelligence about operations that they want to conduct. Outside of that, I have not seen any evidence to show that we tell them where to strike and then they strike those targets. Yes, they are. Oi! It will lead to a direct confrontation with NATO. How are we confronting them right now? Indirectly. If we're going to wage war, we should wage war. Yesterday, everyone went on, oh, how can you have Gorilov say on Sorlev's show that we should use tactical nuclear weapons? So, for context, Soleniev, the day before this program, had somebody on his show that advocated very openly that the Russian military should take a tactical nuclear weapon and throw it at the spearhead of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Zaporozhye in the south right now at the recently liberated town of Robotny. So just lob a tactical nuclear weapon, destroy 80 years of precedent around nuclear weapons around the globe, isolate Russia, and, interestingly enough, possibly also hurt Russian soldiers because the Russian positions and Ukrainian positions are close enough in the south that there's a decent chance the spillover would end up hurting the Russian soldiers as well. Now, I'm sure a few of those on Russian state TV would say, a sacrifice willing to make, you cut off the weak arm in order for the body to survive, whatever they would say. But there's a lot of reasons why the Russians wouldn't want to do this. international backlash, possibly can hurt their own troops, would probably lead to an escalation of aid to Ukraine. And if there's any way you'd want to get the Chinese and the Indians and a lot of the people you want on your side with this war to at least buy your energy export, this is one way you could turn them against it and make them agree to a price cap on Russian energy exports. Just saying, not the smartest move in the world, but that type of like big, like chest beating rhetoric of we're gonna wipe the Ukrainians off the face of the earth, that's sadly pretty commonplace on Russian state TV. Like very, 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 very commonplace on Russian state TV. But it's 90% to 95%, in my opinion, rhetoric.
Burns is
and not particularly serious rhetoric. If you listen to who makes the statements around nuclear weapons in Russia, it's never anybody that would have a deciding factor on nuclear weapons. If they're making a statement like this, it's just some armchair commentator, someone on state TV, somebody who's mostly just jostling for a domestic response. For example, it would be like if Tucker Carlson went on went on a show tomorrow and said, Biden is weak on the cartels because he didn't use a nuke on Mexico. Now, obviously, this is not going to necessarily mean the United States is going to use a nuke on Mexico tomorrow. It probably just means that Tucker Carlson wants to play to a populist base on that issue and get their attention and try to rile them up, either against Mexico, against the cartels, or just, grab attention. And I think that's what Solonyev's doing. I think that's what a lot of the state TV is doing. I think they're trying to escalate rhetoric and get the Russian public against Ukraine. Because none of this rhetoric is followed up with action. Like if he was to say this and then the government was to release a statement like, if Ukraine touches Crimean land, we will use a nuclear weapon, and then they start moving the nuclear weapons around, then this is a situation where the United States might actually raise its nuclear readiness level. This should be treated, in my opinion, similarly to when like a North Korean general says they're going to wipe California off the face of the earth. Also, I just want to say, Harakter, Nuk, thank you so much for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. There are Naravax, Kalidia, Sergeant Juggernauts, Cyberwolf, and Shin. I appreciate it, buddy. Thank you. Enough whining. Sniffling wimps are everywhere. There's a historical article that says, how could you? Every gopher is an agriculturalist. You want to argue with Sergey? Get ready and head for the front lines. Show how you can do it without nuclear weapons. So his argument is, oh, you don't think Russia should use a nuclear weapon, ending 80 years of precedent to try to stop the Ukrainians from taking back their land? Then, if you think that's stupid, then you have to go to the front line and die. If you're not willing to use a nuclear weapon, then you need to show how we can do it without a nuclear weapon. Because to him, there's no consideration of like, well, maybe the cost is too high. Could you imagine if he says on state TV, well, maybe actually this war isn't worth it? He would lose his spot immediately, just like that, done. He'd probably be accused of unpatriotic activity, and before you know it, he'd be in one of those glass cells. Thank you for your work, Dylan. I really appreciate it as a Ukrainian citizen. Thank you. And I appreciate your financial support. It really does help. Hope you're doing well. Enough talking and writing articles about negotiations. We should freeze the conflict. Our economy is suffering. Every ass that is writing this nonsense should be dragged out so people know these faces. What? Don't you understand? Slaves. Worthless slaves of the dollar system. Worthless slaves of the dollar system. No, it's not that they're slaves of the dollar system. It's that they're slaves to their stomach, right? People need to eat. People need to drink. They're also slaves to the weather. People need heating. People need things like air conditioning. Now, people are slaves to the bodily needs in what is necessary to live, thrive, and survive. People need to be able to go to the market and come home with a basket full of goods to feed their family. Now, if you say that's slave to the dollar system, I guess that's a slave to the dollar system. But I think that's just them being a slave to their bodily needs, which the Russian government is less interested in fulfilling than their revanchist goals in Ukraine. Pathetic mutts. A massive drone attack against Russian objects. Peskov, what is it? Let's break it down into a number of obvious questions. Peskov is next to the border with NATO. Where was it launched from? Ukraine? Yeah, right. From the territory of the Baltics, then destroy the Baltics. Erase them off the face of the earth. Okay, so again, all it took, I just want to emphasize this, all it took him to say, erase the Baltics, which is 3 countries, by the way, right? So he just said it was from the Baltics. Right, and so let's actually bring up the map for a moment. Let's bring back up the map to show you why he might suspect the Baltics, but also let's explain the logic here. So the Baltics are up here, right next to Russia proper. You've got Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. You've got these 3 countries. Now, here in this area is Peskov, right here. This is Peskov. And so he is suspect of a drone coming from Ukraine, which is all the way down here. I think that makes sense. Now, I think, and a lot of the analysts I've talked to say one of the easiest explanations, because it isn't the first time that Ukraine has got agents within Russia or it's crossed the border. We all remember the incursion into Belgorod, that Ukrainian special operators got into the country, then flew drones and then struck these targets from inside Russia, that's a possibility. But he sees these 2 countries, which are both in NATO, close to Peskov, and he concludes, aha, they could have been launched from the Baltics. But the thing is, even though he doesn't have any evidence for this, let's just for a moment say that there might be something to it. There are 3 different countries in the Baltics. Since he has no evidence that it even happened, he couldn't even begin to determine which Baltic country, Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, did it. So he just decides, kill them all. Kill them all. Could you imagine, we get told, Dylan, there was an attack that could have been, we don't have any evidence for it, from Guatemala, Ecuador, or Bolivia. And then my response is, oh, so just blow them all up. That is the type of stuff that is regularly getting pumped out on Russian state TV. Just bomb them too, bomb those people, bomb them. This is the type of rhetoric that you would be escalating if you wanted a war with all of Europe. Or even if you were to not get a war with all of Europe, you would want to extend your goals past Ukraine. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily is what the Russian government is going to do, either because they're denied it physically by the Ukrainians, or, you know, Putin dies and something changes, or there's some secret policy we don't know about. But the rhetoric that we're seeing on state TV is within line of those types of goals. Let's continue. If the strike was launched from a NATO country, this is NATO's declaration of war against Russia. Again, right now, he's just in complete speculation territory. He hasn't provided any evidence that it was the Baltics. He just said it could have been the Baltics, didn't even name a country, and now he's just speculating about having to declare war on all of NATO. Nuclear weapons should be immediately used, among other things. We've said this many times, many times. We're catching spies functioning in our country. Alexander writes, there is no martial law in Peskov. I couldn't care less whether there is martial law or not. If you, idiot, can't see that a war is underway, then I could spit on how it's designated, Alexander. When things are exploding and you're being bombed, it's irrelevant whether it says there's martial law. Defend your motherland. Well, okay, I don't know if this is just... I just want to say that martial law does matter. It can determine what hours people are inside and outside, so it makes it a lot easier for local authorities to catch saboteurs and people like that, because if someone's outside doing saboteur work, you know, you're one of the few people outside. It's going to be a lot easier to spot you in a crowd if you're the only person outside, you know, because there's no crowd. There also are a lot of other emergency powers that the government can be given in those situations that might be able to help during wartime. So I don't think not having the designation of martial law is not really is something that's not important whatsoever. It also sends a signal to the domestic population, I think, that like, hey, things are bad. Be safe. Take shelter. But I mean, like, Piskov's also not near the border with Ukraine. I don't know if they're going to do that. A lot of long pauses. How are we supposed to understand all of this? How? I like how he transitions from let's wipe 3 countries off the face of the earth to, man, I don't really understand. How are we supposed to understand this situation? I don't know how you could be calling for nuclear Armageddon, using nuclear weapons in the field, wiping countries off the face of the earth, and then end it with, man, I can't really make any sense of what's going on here. That's it. There should be no more conversations about red lines and whether they will be crossed. Our diplomats should finally stop babbling. Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov states our official position. Zarkovka is the voice of the foreign ministry. And the majority of the rest just shut up. This seems like another thing directed at the bloggers and the critics of how the government is running the war. But I don't know if the domestic Russian public, every time something like this happens, takes away the message. Ugh, if only we were all more unified. And maybe if the military was being criticized less, maybe we'd be winning. Because how many times is the government going to fail when the government has as much power as it does in Russia, with like skipping the repercussions, with skipping the bill, saying, oh, it's not our fault, even though we have all the power. Speak up only based on a directive of the foreign minister, stating a clear position prescribed by the government, and not their personal views. Wow, what a position. Everybody should... He's saying this on state TV with no sense of irony. Everyone should shut up about their personal views and just take the position of the foreign government. Just don't have opinions on bombs exploding over your house. So there are no illusions like, oh no, how could it be? Suri writes, what is this hysteria? We can't win waging a so-called operation. You should call war a war. We won't win as long as cowards are in power. Suri. Wait, 1 second. Suri, where are you writing this from, dirtbag? Why are you appropriating the Wagnerites? Dirtbag, how are you related to them? Go fight next to our guys. Instead of writing all sorts of trash here. By the way, I love the whole, like, guys, stop being so divided. We need to, we need to unite. And then immediately is like, you Wagnerite scum. How dare you get in the trenches and die. I'm covering up with the Wagnerites. The Wagnerites would never have written this. It's time to wage war for real. That's what we've been waiting for. Oh my God, man. Finally, we've been waiting for that. Oh my God. I was waiting for so long for the Russians to announce, okay, we're gonna start dropping bombs, but it's for realsies this time. These are the real bombs, not the fake ones we've been dropping for the last 9.5 years. These are the real ones that actually kill people. Maybe he's watched too much of conservative American Twitter and he's starting to believe all those posts about the fake war in Ukraine. I mean, you marched on Kiev. How more real could the war get? Harshly, delivering strikes. Instead of, oh no, it's not like us. I mean, last night, the Russians tried to strike basically every major population center, just doing drone strikes and missile strikes all across the country. Vast majority of them got shot down. 2 civilians died. Don't want to underplay the tragedy of 2 civilian deaths, but the Russians are getting less and less effective at striking civilian infrastructure deep within the country as the Ukrainian crews get better and better at using air defense and are continually supplied by the West with air defense. It seemed like the Russian strategy seemed to be was wearing down Ukrainian air defense, but so far that has not turned out results. So I don't know what he means by just like bomb them harder. How should they change their bombing tactics from what they did last night when they launched like, what was it, like 20 something drones and like 17 missiles? Like, what should it be? 30 drones, 30 missiles? How many missiles do they have? They're already importing tons and tons of components from overseas. I don't know if you guys see this or if you guys know this, but they're not producing enough domestic microchip components in order to build missiles to replace the ones they're using. If you look at the drones and the missiles that are falling out of the sky and getting shot down by the Ukrainians and they recover, 67% of them are originating in China. And that's just the drones. If you can go and find 81% of foreign components and Russian missiles originating in the United States. Now, this is something that obviously very much angers me. You guys should go read this Kiev Independent piece. You guys should go read both of these Kiev Independent pieces. God, the Kiev Independent has really made a name for itself in this war. Fantastic outlet. But Russia just cannot produce enough of these components domestically, so they're trying to find ways to get these components from overseas through workarounds and shell companies. And if they're trying to scramble to do that, that means they just don't have enough components to replace all of the missiles that they would like to fire at the Ukrainians. So they have to ration it to some capacity. And the vast majority of them are getting shot down. So when he says just bomb them harder, it's not that the Russians could and just don't want to, and they have held back all this time. It's that the Russians did, and they definitely did at the start of the war. But, you know, what is it? The law of diminishing returns? Not only is it, after the millionth bomb you've dropped, it's not going to have the same fear impact on the domestic population here in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are getting better at shooting them down, and they have been given air defense systems like Patriots and other air defense systems like from the Germans, and the Russians are having to rely on more and more wonky tactics like firing S-300s, just lobbing it at cities. But they still terror bomb cities, but it's just not as effective as it used to be. And so when he says just turn up the dial, number one, can the Russians even do that? Number two, how effective would that even be? How would this end differently than how it was during the winter when they targeted the electrical infrastructure to try to freeze out the Ukrainians and knock out their power? That didn't work. Why would this work? How would this change the war in any way fundamentally? Destroy to hell all government and administration buildings in Kiev. These are symbols. Stop striking objects no one knows without any confirmation. We destroyed their energy infrastructure last winter. How did that go? They have no power. They can't see well to launch their drones. Stop retaliating by destroying something someplace. I understand everything. We are soft and intelligent. When I talk to people around the world about what they think when they hear the word Russia, the two words that come out of their mouth every time is soft and intelligent. Another one I also get is tolerant. Very tolerant. Let's set it aside. It's time to understand this. We are at war with evil. So let it be in the Bible. They will be put to death. Their blood is upon them. Destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. Wait, 1 second. 1 moment. Let me just do something quick. Let me 1 second. Where is it? Here it is. It's time to understand this. We are at war with evil. So let it be like in the Bible. They will be put to death. Their blood is upon them. Destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. With fire and brimstone from the skies. Like, dude, this is like medieval stuff. Like, we're gonna fire and brimstone, fire from the skies. It's gonna be Sodom and Gomorrah, and we're gonna. This is the language of fascists, and I don't like using the word fascist too much because I don't want to like overuse it. But this type of, and Timothy Snyder talked about this in a fantastic article in the New York Times. But this sounds very much like we have our antithesis, we have our enemy, and we're going to use the cleansing violence to be rid of our enemy, to be rid of the opposition in this glorious battle to bring back our revanchist past. Like, this is just like point, end of period, end of paragraph, fascist violence. I don't take a lot of moments to acknowledge that fascism is fascism, because I think a lot of times it's pretty obvious when you hear stuff like this that sounds like it's straight out of like an ISIS speech, you know, that it's fascist. But I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is fascist propaganda while they're engaged in supposedly a war to fight fascism in Ukraine, while hiring fascist militias like Rusich to do their fighting. I think a lot of people think like, oh, fascism, like to be fascist, you have to have like a swastika, right? That's fascism. That's not true. Fascism did not originate with Nazi Germany. You can go back to like Italy and Bettina Mussolini in the 1910s and 1920s, and it evolving during that time in the black shirts in Italy. You can also go back to the authors that people like Vladimir Putin himself has referenced. Anyway, let's go back. And I don't want to get too deep into the fascism conversation. I just wanted to stop for a moment and acknowledge the type of rhetoric that's being used here. Oh, and let me just say, when I say this is fascist rhetoric from the most popular propagandist, or one of the top 2 or 3 most popular propagandists in the entire country of Russia. Like one of their Tucker Carlson types. So just throwing that out there. So it's not like some small outlet. This isn't like Matt Walsh, okay? It's like Sean Hannity. What is happening? If we can't handle drones, how will we deal with F-16s? That is the first interesting inquiry that I've heard Soloniev ever put forward on his show. A number of articles have appeared by all these people from the 90s
Morally corrupt.
explaining why we should surrender to the West. Droven, thank you so much for the prime. I appreciate it. This is completely pointless. Economy of this size can't oppose the mighty West. We are on the fringes of the global economy. Why are we sticking our snout where it doesn't belong? And all of this is being published. All of it is being discussed. They're moving their fingers like this. A war is underway. Okay, to zoom in. Gotta zoom in. Zoom. I don't understand. These nations have embassies here. Throw them all the heck out. The British, the Americans, the French, get them out of here, those beasts. All you have to do here is spy. All they do here is spy against us. Oh no, you don't understand. Then they will throw out ours as well. We should have recalled them a long time ago. But how? What about consular services? For whom should we provide our consular services? For a London grad? For a London grad. So... I like the dodge of the question here, because the point he puts forward is we should pull back all of our embassies and kick out the American embassies. Then somebody he mockingly makes them respond, okay, but if we kick out the American embassies, they're going to kick out our embassies. And then he says, I don't care. And then he follows up by saying, okay, but then what about all the consular services for all the Russians living overseas? And there are millions of Russians living in countries like Germany and other nations in the across Europe and the United States. And his answer is basically, who cares? London grad. He just made a joke out of it. It was a genuine inquiry, and he just responded to it by saying, Lamau. Those are millions of Russians. Millions of Russians. That would probably end up hurting the Russians living in Europe much more than the amount. I don't even know how many Westerners actually live in Russia that would be affected by these embassies getting kicked out. Either way, there's a reason why the Russians haven't done this, and he just kind of like mocked that reason. After the drone strike on the Kremlin, we didn't even wipe the center of Kiev off the face of the earth. I like how his standard is drone blows up near the Kremlin, doesn't damage the Kremlin, it like slightly fringes the flag, and the rational response in his mind is to completely level and flatten the city center of the most populous city in the entire country of Ukraine, a city of 3.5 million people. You know what this sounds like? And obviously it's not comparable, because 9/11 was a terrorist attack. Obviously, it was an attack against, attack against America, led by Osama bin Laden. But if you guys ever listen to the Howard Stern show after the 9/11 attacks, it is a bizarre experience. Now, of course, he's in New York, continuing to do the show as this is happening. So you can understand why the dude's angry. But the dude's just saying, like, blow up this country, blow up that country. We need to wipe this country off the face of the earth, wipe that country off the face of the earth. This guy has that mentality towards a country that they started the war with and they invaded for blood soil conquest. He has the type of anger that I would expect from somebody to like espouse like during the hours after 9/11, and he's espousing it nearly 2 years on to a war that the Russians started. Does it matter that they're permitted to do anything? Or is there a limit to our patience? Telegram channel Solenyev. And now the weather, followed by Golonyev's time. Are we gonna have weather? Cuckoo, guys. Greetings. I yell for a bit in the morning, and the techies assume that they can relax. And you tell the weather, I will go punish them harshly. I will make them do push-ups. Doing push-ups is the most humane way. Good morning. Russian State TV. Certainly still I would say not that substantive towards convincing me. So it's Russian State TV is still Russian State TV, still living in its alternative Tom Clancy ass universe.